The evening started with high expectations, but tension could already be felt in the air. The restaurant was elegant, filled with soft lights, polished tables, and quiet music meant to calm the guests. It was chosen carefully for an important business meeting. The CEO had flown in that same morning, exhausted but determined. This dinner was not just a meal. It was meant to build trust, close a deal, and set the tone for months of work ahead. He arrived with a small team, all dressed neatly, all alert, but clearly tired. Across the table sat the Italian partners. They were polite, well-mannered, and confident. Everyone smiled at first, exchanged greetings, and took their seats. The problem appeared almost immediately. The menu was in Italian. One of the assistants tried to translate using a phone, but the signal inside the restaurant was weak. Another staff member attempted to help, but his English was limited. Words were exchanged slowly, then repeated, then misunderstood. What should have been a simple order turned into confusion. A few minutes passed, then a few more. The CEO leaned back in his chair and glanced at his watch. He was not used to waiting. His life moved on schedules, not delays. He tried to remain calm, reminding himself that patience was part of leadership. Still, his jaw tightened. The Italian guests spoke quietly among themselves. Their expressions were polite, but the energy was shifting. The flow of conversation felt broken. Jokes fell flat. Small talk died quickly. The waiter standing at the table looked nervous, scribbling notes and asking the same questions again. When the wrong appetizer arrived, the CEO finally sighed. Not loudly, but enough for everyone to hear. It was not anger yet, but it was close. He pushed the plate slightly aside and said something under his breath to his assistant. The assistant nodded, embarrassed. This restaurant had been recommended as one of the best. Now it felt like a mistake. Around them, other guests laughed, talked, and enjoyed their meals. That only made the situation feel worse. The CEO felt eyes on him, even if no one was really watching. He hated disorder, especially in moments that mattered. He tried again to explain a simple request, speaking slowly, choosing easy words. The waiter nodded too quickly, pretending to understand. The Italian partners exchanged looks. One of them leaned forward and said something in Italian, clearly asking a question. No one answered. Silence stretched across the table. The CEO felt it pressing against his chest. This dinner was supposed to impress. Instead, it was turning into a quiet embarrassment. He wondered how such a basic thing like language could become such a serious problem. He cleared his throat and forced a small smile. "It's fine," he said, though it clearly wasn't. His tone was controlled, but the strain was there. He was losing patience, not because of hunger, but because control was slipping away. Across the room, near the service station, a young waitress noticed everything. She had been working since the early afternoon. Her feet hurt, her back ached, and she was counting the minutes until her shift ended. Still, she paid attention. She always did. It was a habit she'd picked up long ago. She noticed the stiff posture of the man at the head of the table. She noticed how carefully he chose his words, and how frustrated he looked when they didn't land right. She noticed the Italian speaking softly, trying not to appear rude. Most of all, she noticed the growing gap between them. She said nothing. She kept her head down and continued her tasks, refilling water glasses at nearby tables, clearing plates, moving quietly. To anyone watching, she was just another waitress doing her job. No one would guess she understood every word the Italian guests were saying. At the main table, the mood continued to drop. The CEO's assistant tried again to fix things, offering apologies and explaining the delay. The Italian partners nodded, but their smiles were thinner now. The CEO looked around the restaurant, then back at the table. He wondered if this dinner should be cut short. He hated wasting time. If communication was this difficult now, what would future meetings look like? He pressed his fingers together and took a slow breath. Years of experience had taught him not to explode in public. Still, his patience had limits. Another dish arrived, again not quite right. This time, the CEO spoke up more firmly. His voice was still calm, but the edge was impossible to miss. The waiter froze, unsure how to respond. He looked helpless, trapped between languages he didn't fully understand. The Italian guest stopped talking altogether. That was when the waitress near the service station paused. She looked at the table again. She hesitated, just for a second, in her world. Speaking up was not something she usually did. She had learned long ago that staying quiet was safer. Life had taught her that skills didn't always earn respect, and sometimes they only brought trouble. But she also knew something else. She knew this moment mattered. She had spent years in places where language was the only bridge between strangers. She had watched deals fail and friendships break simply because people could not understand each other. She had learned that words, when used well, could calm anger faster than any apology. Still, she stayed where she was. For now, at the table, the CEO leaned forward slightly. He was close to ending the dinner. He didn't say it out loud, but everyone could feel it. The opportunity was slipping away, minute by minute. The restaurant manager approached, offering apologies in broken English. The CEO nodded, but his eyes showed disappointment. This was not the standard he expected. The Italian partners whispered again. One of them checked his phone. Another glanced toward the door. The waitress took a slow breath. She adjusted her apron and stepped forward, not toward the table yet, but closer than before. Her heart beat faster, but her face remained calm. She waited, watching, listening. No one noticed her movement. The CEO spoke once more, his tone firm but controlled. It was clear he was giving the situation one last chance. The waitress stopped walking. She stood still, just a few steps away, as the tension hung heavy in the air. The sound of plates clinking in the kitchen echoed faintly behind her. The restaurant felt quieter than before, as if it, too, was waiting. She had not spoken a single word yet, but everything was about to change. The seconds felt longer than they really were. The CEO sat still, his shoulders stiff, his attention fixed on the table in front of him. He was no longer looking around the room. His focus had narrowed, as if the rest of the restaurant no longer existed. He had come here with clear goals, and now those goals were slipping away because of something that should have been simple. His assistant leaned closer and whispered a suggestion. Maybe they could move the meeting to another place. Maybe they could finish dinner quickly and talk later. The CEO listened, but he did not respond right away. His eyes moved the Italian guests. They were polite, but their patience was thinning too. One of them gave a small smile and said something in Italian, his tone calm but firm. It was clear he was asking whether this dinner would continue or end here. No one answered him. The silence felt heavier this time. It wasn't just awkward anymore. It felt final. Nearby, the waitress stood still, holding a tray she no longer needed. She watched the CEO's face, noticing the tight lines around his eyes. She had seen that look before, not on powerful people only, but on tired ones, people who were trying to stay calm while everything around them refused to cooperate. She shifted her weight slightly, reminding herself to breathe. Her mind was racing, though her expression stayed neutral. She told herself that this was not her place. She was there to serve food, not to fix business problems. But the words at the table kept pulling at her attention. The Italian guests spoke again, quietly, their voices low and controlled. She understood every word. They were not angry, just disappointed. They felt the meeting had not been taken seriously enough. They wondered if this reflected how future cooperation would be handled. The waitress swallowed. She remembered other rooms, other tables, other moments where language stood between people like a wall. She remembered how often she had stayed silent back then too, afraid of being seen, afraid of stepping out of line. Silence had been her shield. At the table, the restaurant manager returned, clearly nervous. He apologized again, using simple phrases, repeating himself. The CEO nodded once, then twice, but his face did not soften. "I understand," he said calmly, "but we're running out of time." His voice was steady, but there was no warmth in it anymore. The manager promised to do better and stepped away. The waiter returned with water, his hand shaking slightly. He avoided eye contact. The Italian guests exchanged another look. One of them placed his napkin on the table, folding it carefully. It was a small gesture, but it spoke loudly. He was preparing to leave. The CEO noticed. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on the table. For a brief moment, the control slipped. A tired breath escaped his lips. This deal mattered more than anyone in the room realized. It wasn't just about money. It was about timing, trust, and a chance that might not come again. Across the room, the waitress felt something tighten in her chest. She told herself again to stay quiet. She had learned to survive by not drawing attention. Speaking up could mean trouble. It could mean questions she didn't want to answer. Still, her feet moved slightly forward. She stopped herself. The CEO's assistant tried one last time, using a translation app, holding the phone out awkwardly. The app spoke in a flat, broken voice. The Italian guest listened, confused, then smiled politely. It was not enough. The mood dropped further. One of the Italian guests stood halfway, pushing his chair back just a little, not fully standing, just enough to show intent. That was when the waitress made eye contact with him. It was brief but meaningful. He looked at her without expectation, without curiosity. To him, she was simply part of the background. She looked away quickly. Her heart beat faster. She knew she could help. She also knew that once she spoke, there would be no going back. People would ask questions. They would look at her differently. She thought of how far she had fallen from who she once was, or maybe how far life had pushed her. She thought of nights spent studying by dim lights, of conversations held in crowded rooms where she was the outsider learning to belong. At the table, the CEO straightened his back. He glanced at his watch again, then placed it face down on the table. It was a signal, a final one. "I think we should stop here," he said, his voice calm but final. The Italian guests nodded slowly. One of them smiled politely, but disappointment was clear. Chairs shifted. The moment was slipping away. The waitress took a step forward. Her hands were slightly cold now. She could hear her own breathing. She told herself she didn't need to save the whole dinner. Maybe she could just help for a moment. Maybe just a sentence. Still, she hesitated. The CEO stood up halfway, placing his hands on the table as if to push himself up fully. His assistant followed his movement. The meeting was ending. The waitress felt a strange calm settle over her. She realized something then. Staying silent had protected her for a long time, but it had also kept her invisible. This moment would pass whether she acted or not. The only difference was whether she would forgive herself afterward. She took another step forward. This time, she did not stop. The sound of her shoes against the floor was soft, but close enough now to be noticed. The CEO glanced up briefly, distracted, assuming she was there to clear plates. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Not yet. The Italian guests were gathering their things. One of them said a final sentence, his tone respectful but firm. He thanked the CEO for the effort, but it was clear he felt the meeting had failed. The waitress listened carefully. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. The CEO nodded once, his face unreadable. He hated unfinished business. He hated wasted chances. The waitress took a breath. She stepped closer to the table, close enough now that everyone could see her clearly. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, almost gentle. She did not rush. She did not interrupt. The room seemed to quiet again, as if it sensed something shifting. She was still silent, but the choice had been made. In the next moment, she would speak, and nothing would be the same after that. The waitress took one final deep breath. Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm. She stepped closer to the table, far enough that the CEO and the Italian guests could see her clearly. She lowered her voice slightly, not loud, not demanding attention, but firm and precise. The words came naturally, without hesitation. She spoke in perfect, native-level Italian. Immediately, the room changed. The Italian guests froze for a second, surprise flashing across their faces. The CEO blinked, momentarily stunned. He had assumed no one in the restaurant could speak their language. Yet here was a young waitress, ordinary at first glance, carrying herself with confidence and understanding. Her accent was flawless, her tone respectful but confident. The meaning was clear and direct. The Italian guests responded in kind, their voices easing into normal conversation. They asked questions, which she answered smoothly. She clarified previous misunderstandings about the order and about certain polite gestures that had been misread. In moments, the tension that had weighed on the room so heavily lifted. Conversations began to flow naturally. Smiles returned. Laughter quietly bubbled under the surface, soft but genuine. The CEO remained in place, almost frozen. His mind raced. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. He had dealt with high-level negotiations for years. He had seen interpreters and professionals, people hired specifically for these moments. Yet none of them had ever managed to save a dinner that seemed doomed to fail so effortlessly. This young waitress had done exactly that. Her hands moved naturally as she gestured, pointing gently to dishes and confirming details. The Italian guests were now nodding, smiling, occasionally laughing softly at her words. She was not just translating. She was guiding them, bridging gaps they hadn't realized existed. She added small cultural notes, explanations of phrases, and subtle hints about etiquette that made the visitors feel respected and understood. The CEO slowly leaned back in his chair. He remained silent, but his eyes followed her every move. His earlier frustration had melted into astonishment. He realized that this moment was more than just saving a dinner. It was a display of intelligence, calm, and courage. She had stepped out of her expected role, and in doing so, she had transformed the entire situation. The Italian guests now fully engaged, continuing their conversation without hesitation. The waiter who had been stumbling earlier hovered nearby, unsure what to do. He glanced at the manager, whose jaw had dropped slightly. No one had expected this. The restaurant, which had seemed incapable of handling the situation moments ago, now appeared competent and professional. The waitress moved gracefully, answering questions, ensuring that everyone understood each other perfectly. When the CEO finally spoke, it was with a tone of relief and admiration. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice carried more weight than any prior command he had given that evening. It was not just polite acknowledgement. It was genuine appreciation. The waitress nodded slightly, continuing her work, but there was a quiet pride in her posture. The Italian guests smiled at her. One of them leaned forward and said something quickly in Italian, laughing softly. She responded just as naturally, matching the tone and energy perfectly. The CEO watched silently, realizing that her skill was far beyond simple language knowledge. She understood nuances, humor, respect, and timing, the things that truly matter when communicating across cultures. For the first time that evening, the CEO allowed himself to relax slightly. The dinner was no longer a disaster. The mood at the table had shifted completely. The Italian guests were comfortable, smiling genuinely, chatting freely. The previous tension was gone, replaced by a sense of connection and ease. The waitress, meanwhile, remained composed. She had not boasted or drawn attention to herself. She had acted out of instinct and knowledge. Her movements were calm, her expressions steady. No one had expected her to speak, yet she had done so in a way that felt natural, necessary, and flawless. The assistant sitting beside the CEO watched with admiration. He whispered quietly, acknowledging quick thinking and skill it had taken. The CEO nodded, though his mind was still processing the unexpected turn of events. The dinner continued smoothly. Orders were corrected effortlessly. The guests asked for additional items, and the waitress guided the staff with ease. The restaurant, which had felt chaotic just minutes ago, now appeared competent, professional, and attentive. The CEO observed the change carefully. He realized that this young woman had more than language skills. She had composure under pressure, confidence, and a deep understanding of people. She had read the table, the mood, and the needs of both sides perfectly. She had delivered what no one else could. At one point, a humorous misunderstanding arose. A simple dish had been described differently by the translation app earlier. The guests laughed quietly, and she smiled warmly, correcting it instantly without making anyone feel embarrassed. The CEO noticed how naturally she handled it, how her presence calmed tensions rather than inflaming them. The Italian guests now leaned back comfortably. The CEO finally smiled himself, a genuine smile unforced. He allowed a small sigh of relief to escape. He realized that the success of this dinner, once in doubt, now rested entirely on her actions. Time passed. The dishes were served correctly. The guests seemed relaxed, engaged in light conversation, enjoying the meal. The waitress moved efficiently, but without drawing attention to herself. She spoke only when necessary, her words measured and precise. After a while, The CEO spoke to one of the guests in English. The conversation flowed well, aided by the understanding that had already been established through the waitress's translation. It was clear that the deal, once at risk, was now firmly back on track. The Italian guests were appreciative, nodding and expressing satisfaction. Their body language showed comfort and trust, a stark contrast to their earlier tension. The CEO finally leaned back fully, a look of contentment on his face. He had witnessed something remarkable. The waitress paused briefly, allowing a moment for everyone to breathe. Her role was not over, but she had ensured the foundation of understanding was set. The room now felt warmer, more connected. The previous frustration, embarrassment, and impatience had been replaced with mutual respect and engagement. No one else at the table had anticipated her intervention. The CEO realized that without her, this evening could have ended poorly, potentially damaging relationships and opportunities. Yet she had stepped up without seeking recognition, simply because she knew the situation required it. She moved subtly, checking in with the kitchen, ensuring the right orders were prepared, all while maintaining the calm energy at the table. The guests occasionally spoke directly to her, appreciating her assistance. She responded gracefully, ensuring that their needs were met without overstepping. By the end of the main course, the atmosphere was almost entirely different from before. The tension that had threatened to ruin the evening had vanished. Conversation flowed, smiles were shared, and laughter returned. The CEO leaned back, silently observing. He had expected a simple dinner, but what he witnessed was something far beyond ordinary service. The guests complimented the meal and the attentiveness of the staff. The waitress remained modest, accepting gratitude with quiet acknowledgement. Her focus was on the experience of the table, not on personal recognition. Yet the CEO noticed her entirely. He could see the skill, intelligence, and calm that had made this evening successful. As dessert was served, the Italian guest joked lightly, and she responded with humor and understanding. The CEO smiled broadly, finally letting his earlier tension go completely. He realized that this dinner, once on the brink of failure, had been rescued by someone who had been overlooked and underestimated. The waitress continued her work quietly, her presence now fully appreciated by those at the table. Though she remained humble, she had acted with intelligence, care, and skill. She had changed the course of the evening without arrogance or demand. For the CEO, the realization sank in. Talent and intelligence often hide in plain sight. The most crucial moments can be saved by those who act with courage, even from positions where no one expects them to make a difference. By the time the dinner was ending, the Italian guests were relaxed, engaged, and satisfied. The CEO looked at the waitress one last time, his admiration clear. He understood, more than words could express, that she had done what few could have accomplished. She had not only saved the dinner, but had also ensured the foundation for the success that would follow. The waitress, still calm and composed, moved back to her regular duties, the quiet hero of the evening. Yet the memory of this moment, the change she had created, was impossible to forget. The CEO knew that he would never look at ordinary service the same way again. Talent could be hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting for the moment to shine. After the dinner had settled into a smooth rhythm, the CEO finally allowed himself a moment to observe more closely. The Italian guests were laughing quietly, enjoying their meals and sharing small stories. It was hard to believe that, just a short while ago, frustration and silence had filled the table. The transformation was complete, and it had all been orchestrated by the young waitress. He could no longer ignore her presence. She moved calmly among the tables, making sure everyone's needs were met. Her actions were precise, controlled, and purposeful. He realized that her language skills were only a part of what made her remarkable. She had read the room, understood the mood, and responded in exactly the way the moment demanded. Curiosity got the better of him. During a brief lull, when the Italian guests were enjoying a dessert course, he motioned to his assistant and quietly asked about her. The assistant shrugged, admitting that he didn't know much, other than that she had been working there for some time and was known to be reliable. The CEO nodded thoughtfully. He wanted more. After the guests left, thanking the staff and complimenting the restaurant, the CEO asked to speak with the waitress privately. She approached cautiously, unsure why the man at the head of the table now wanted to talk to her alone. Most people had simply thanked her and moved on, but his presence demanded attention. He began by asking how she had learned Italian. She hesitated, then smiled softly, realizing that her story, once hidden, was about to be noticed. She explained quietly, almost humbly, that she had spent several years in Italy. It was not for work or leisure, but because her family had circumstances that required her to be there. She had lived in small towns, learned the language by necessity, studied hard, and worked multiple jobs to support herself. The CEO listened intently, impressed not only by her skills but by the dedication it had taken to acquire them under challenging circumstances. She had returned home due to family needs, and life had forced her to take a job in a restaurant. Speaking of it casually now, she almost downplayed the effort it had taken to become fluent. But the impact was clear to him. He asked her about her previous experiences. She described moments when her language skills had been useful, small ways she had helped travelers or assisted her community. She had never sought recognition. No one had ever asked her to do more than serve food. Yet, here she was, performing perfectly under pressure when no one else could. The CEO reflected on the irony. This young woman, who had seemed ordinary at first glance, carried a world of knowledge, experience, and resilience. She had been invisible in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to show her true abilities. And she had done so with grace, humility, and intelligence. He asked about her future plans, wondering how someone of her talent had not been guided toward opportunities that matched her skills. She admitted she had few options, and that life had always been about survival first, ambition second. The CEO nodded, understanding that it was not just skill that made a person remarkable, but the circumstances in which those skills were cultivated and the courage to act when it mattered most. For the CEO, the lesson was clear. Talent is not always obvious. It hides behind ordinary roles, behind quiet individuals, waiting for the right situation. Many people might have seen her as just another waitress, someone performing routine tasks, but she had revealed an extraordinary depth of skill and intelligence. He began thinking about how to ensure she received recognition. It was not about reward alone. It was about creating opportunities that matched her abilities. He considered his company, the projects underway, and the challenges that lay ahead. Someone with her skills, composure, and intelligence could contribute in ways few others could. The waitress continued to explain that she had always learned to adapt. Life had required her to be attentive, resourceful, and calm under pressure. She had seen situations where quick thinking and understanding of human behavior could make a difference, and she had learned to trust her instincts. Speaking Italian at the table had not been a calculated act for recognition. It had been instinctual. She had understood the moment and acted appropriately. The CEO admired her humility. It was rare to see such capability paired with such modesty. Many people with talent often sought the spotlight, but she had acted quietly, letting results speak for themselves. That was what made her remarkable in his eyes. He asked about her work in a restaurant, and she explained the routine, the long hours, and the focus required to manage multiple tables efficiently. She described how she observed people, learned their habits, and tried to anticipate needs. Her description made it clear that every action had been intentional, honed over years of experience. She had not just learned language. She had learned observation, timing, and the subtle art of understanding people. The CEO realized that these were the very qualities he had been struggling to find elsewhere that evening. He had assumed the situation was unfixable until she stepped forward. She had not only solved the problem, but elevated the entire experience. Her presence had ensured the dinner succeeded, and she had done so without claiming credit. He paused and reflected. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to act decisively without seeking recognition, to understand both language and human behavior. These were qualities that could change outcomes in any situation. He thought about how often talent like this goes unnoticed, how easily it can be overlooked in routine settings. For the waitress, the evening was returning to normal. She moved quietly, ensuring guests were satisfied, completing tasks efficiently. Yet, the CEO could see the pride in her composure, the subtle satisfaction of having acted correctly in a critical moment. She had saved a dinner, preserved a business relationship, and done it without drama or fanfare. The CEO then asked one final question. Did she want more from life, more opportunity, more challenge? She hesitated, then admitted she had never considered it. Life had always been about immediate needs, surviving, supporting family, and taking what came. She had never thought someone would notice her skills in a way that could lead to opportunity. That was when the CEO made a decision. He offered to create a position for her within his company, one that would utilize her language skills, her understanding of people, and her ability to perform under pressure. She could work directly on projects that involved international clients, bridging gaps that others could not. Her experience and insight were invaluable, and he wanted to ensure she had the chance to grow and be recognized for her abilities. She was stunned. The offer was more than she could have imagined. She had never expected anyone to see her beyond the role she had been performing, let alone offer her a position that matched her talents and ambition. The CEO smiled, noting her reaction. He understood that sometimes the most remarkable people are those who do not seek recognition, yet when the right moment comes, they can transform outcomes entirely. He admired her courage, her humility, and her instinctive intelligence. As the evening wound down, the waitress returned to her normal tasks, but she was no longer invisible. She had been seen, her skills recognized, and her potential acknowledged. For the CEO, the night had been a revelation. For the Italian guests, the dinner had become a story of unexpected efficiency and cultural understanding. And for the waitress, it had been the moment when her quiet capabilities were finally noticed, opening the door to possibilities she had never imagined. The CEO left the restaurant with a sense of satisfaction that went beyond the success of the dinner. He had witnessed a rare example of talent, humility, and courage intersecting at exactly the right moment. It was a reminder that opportunity often meets preparation, and sometimes the most extraordinary abilities are hidden in the most ordinary places. The waitress had stepped forward when it mattered most, and in doing so, she had changed not just the outcome of the evening, but the trajectory of her own life. The next morning, the waitress arrived at the restaurant as usual, her thoughts still lingering on the events of the previous evening. She had performed her duties, helped the guests, and handled a situation few could have managed. Yet, the memory of the CEO's attention and the Italian guests' smiles remained vivid. It was unusual for her to feel recognized, to have her skills acknowledged, and the feeling was both exciting and a little overwhelming. She moved through her tasks methodically, serving tables, refilling drinks, and cleaning plates. Life in the restaurant went on as it always did, but there was a new energy surrounding her. The manager glanced at her a few times, curiosity in his eyes, and she noticed that even the staff seemed a little more aware of her presence. But she stayed focused, careful not to let pride or distraction interfere with her work. Mid-morning, the CEO called the restaurant. His voice was firm but kind as he requested to speak with her privately. She felt a flutter of nerves as she agreed. She had not expected this. She had done her job, saved a difficult dinner, and now he wanted to speak with her outside the context of serving tables. Something in his tone suggested opportunity, not reprimand, and she found herself curious and slightly apprehensive. When she met him in a quiet corner of the restaurant, he greeted her warmly. He did not begin with small talk. Instead, he got straight to the point, praising her actions the previous evening. He described how she had transformed the dinner, bridged communication gaps, and created a calm, productive environment. He acknowledged the courage it took to step forward without hesitation and the intelligence it demonstrated. Her humility in the moment had impressed him even more. He then presented an offer. He wanted her to join his company as a language and cultural liaison. The role would allow her to use her fluency in Italian, her understanding of international etiquette, and her ability to navigate high-pressure situations. She would be involved directly in meetings, negotiations, and projects that required her rare skill set. This was an opportunity she had never imagined, a chance to move beyond the restaurant and into a career where her abilities were fully recognized and valued. She listened quietly, absorbing the words. Her heart raced, and she felt a mix of disbelief, excitement, and cautious hope. She had never thought anyone would notice her in such a way, let alone offer her a position that matched her talents. She had worked hard, lived through challenges, and cultivated skills that were often unseen, and now someone saw their value. She asked questions about the role, the responsibilities, and what would be expected of her. The CEO answered patiently, explaining how she would interact with clients, assist in communication, and ensure that cultural nuances were respected in international dealings. He emphasized that her presence would not just improve efficiency, but build trust and relationships. He made it clear that her contribution would be meaningful and respected. After the conversation, she left the private meeting with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She returned to her duties in the restaurant, but everything felt different. The walls and tables around her seemed the same, but she felt the weight and potential of opportunity. She realized that her actions had created a turning point in her life. She had acted instinctively, but the result had opened doors she had never imagined. Over the following days, she considered the offer carefully. She thought about the responsibilities, the change in lifestyle, and the challenges she would face. She weighed the comfort of routine against the excitement of a new path. Eventually, she realized that she had always wanted more than survival. She wanted a chance to use her skills, to grow, to be recognized for what she could offer. She accepted the position, determined to make the most of the opportunity. The transition was not instant. She spent the first weeks learning the internal workings of the company, observing meetings, and familiarizing herself with the clients and projects. Her previous experiences had prepared her well, and she adapted quickly. Her confidence grew as she realized that she could navigate high-pressure situations, assist effectively, and contribute in ways that were immediately noticeable. The CEO kept his word. He involved her in projects that required her language skills, her understanding of culture, and her ability to read people. She became an invaluable asset, bridging communication gaps and ensuring that misunderstandings were minimized. Her presence brought calm and efficiency to meetings that previously had been tense or confusing. She was no longer invisible. She was respected, relied upon, and appreciated. Her life began to change in other ways, too. She gained confidence, self-assurance, and a new perspective on her abilities. She realized that her past experiences, which had once felt like limitations, were now strengths. Her resilience, observation skills, and adaptability allowed her to excel in ways she had never anticipated. Opportunities continued to expand, and she embraced them with determination and humility. Colleagues and clients alike began to notice her skill and professionalism. They sought her advice, trusted her judgment, and valued her insights. She continued to remain humble, but there was a quiet pride in knowing that she had stepped forward when it mattered most. Her actions had changed her trajectory, and now she could see the impact clearly. The CEO watched her progress with satisfaction. He recognized that talent often hides in unexpected places, and that courage and skill combined can transform situations and lives. Her story became an example within the company, illustrating the power of readiness, humility, and decisive action. She had not only saved a critical dinner, but had reshaped her life and added significant value to the organization. Over time, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From years spent learning and observing, from challenges that had tested her patience and resilience, she realized that each experience had prepared her for this moment. The skills she had cultivated quietly, the instinct she had honed, and the courage she had summoned all converged to create the opportunity she now had. She understood that her actions had mattered, and that recognition, while unexpected, had been earned through dedication and competence. As she settled into her new role, she also understood the importance of giving others a chance to shine. She became attentive to those around her, offering guidance, support, and encouragement. She knew firsthand how it felt to be overlooked, and she wanted to ensure that others had the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities when the moment arose. Her life was transformed, not by luck or circumstance alone, but by the combination of preparation, courage, and skill. She had acted when it mattered most, and the results had rippled outward, changing her world. She no longer felt invisible. She was valued, recognized, and empowered to continue growing and contributing. The CEO continued to rely on her expertise, grateful that someone so capable had stepped forward at a crucial moment. He knew that the dinner that had once seemed doomed was a turning point, not just for the business relationship, but for the waitress's life. The experience reminded him that opportunities often meet preparation, and those who act decisively, even from unexpected positions, can create extraordinary outcomes. The story of a young waitress became an example, a reminder that talent is often hidden, waiting for the right moment to shine. Her actions that night had not only saved a dinner, but had changed the course of her life. She embraced her new path with confidence, humility, and determination, knowing that she had earned the chance to step into a future full of possibility. Her courage and skill had made all the difference, and the world now recognized what had always been there, quietly waiting to emerge.